It's an Archaeo-Death interview with Professor Howard Williams and his guest. Welcome, Archaeo-Deathlings, to yet another Archaeo-Death interview. And I'm really excited to meet for a second time in slightly more relaxed surroundings with Arild from Norway. And Arild, please introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners.
Thank you, Howard. So, I'm an archaeologist and comparative religionist, to call it that. Just finished my PhD in archaeology on the topic of animals in Iron Age mortuary rites. There we go. Iron Age here being defined by the Scandinavian chronology, so it's 500 BC until the end of the Viking Age, around 1050 AD. I've been looking for, and I've been looking at all relevant grave finds from the county of Rogaland down in southwest Norway, and comparing that with other parts of northwest Europe, mostly Scandinavia, but not exclusively in Scandinavia. Apart from that, I've been doing field archaeology for lots of years. I've studied history too. And I like to combine these different approaches to understand the, particularly Iron Age past. Looking in at both, I'm particularly interested in understanding the ontology and religion and aspects of that we don't have a clear impression of, or that where there are many unknowns when it comes to the prehistoric past of Scandinavia.
So you're taking that long durée, that long story of the Iron Age, because it's a big chunky Iron Age in Norway. And I love the fact that obviously you're coming from an interdisciplinary background. You've got that background in comparative religion and archaeology. And as an aside, I have to just note that I love the way you say down in, because for us here in Britain, you're definitely up. But, you know, from a Norwegian perspective, of course, Rogaland is very much a down, you know, it's in the south, isn't it? Well, southwest, you know, but that's really wonderful. And of course, I had the privilege of witnessing your and being a participant in your the examination process and your public examination in Stavanger, which was wonderful. And I just really appreciate you wanting to have a chat and share with people more about what your work was able to find. I mean, the thesis will put a link to it, and I think it's open access, isn't it, via the university?
Yeah. It. I think I also shared the link with you where you can actually download my thesis or look at it.
Yes, we'll put that in the description along with some of the other more information about you. But I want to start off really by asking, you know, how did you get to do a doctoral thesis? How did you become an archaeologist, or what is your background? What got you into this field?
That is a very long story, starting when I was a small child. You know, it's like often as an archaeologist, you talk to people who either will, in my experience, 1/3 tell you, why are you an archaeologist? Whereas 2/3 say something like, oh, I always wanted to be that as a kid.
Yeah.
I was 7 years and had watched a documentary about Thor Heyerdahl, a great Norwegian hero of exploring maybe more than an archaeology kind of. Yeah, and I decided to become an archaeologist. I just never kind of grew up from that notion.
But you haven't been building your own rafts and trying to set off across the Pacific any time in the last few months. You see, you know. But apart from that, it's stayed with you.
Yeah, it did. I had the phases where I thought it was unrealistic to work like this, but then I got older and realized, no, it's actually possible. So the greatest threat to that plan was when I was about to start my master's degree in archaeology, but instead of the kind of gotten so interested in comparative religions that I kind of took the third semester of that and then took a master's degree in that instead, finishing in 2005. So it was only 10 years later that I actually took my master's degree in archaeology after some years of fieldwork. And then, that was basically about the same topic as I continued exploring in this thesis. So you might say that the idea of doing a PhD started while I was finishing my master's degree 10 years ago.
So you've actually got postgraduate qualifications in both disciplines before then doing the PhD. So, and you've been doing during this time, you've been working in commercial archaeology, contract archaeology, or is that the right term? I don't know. But
Definitely,
as an archaeologist.
Yeah, temporary contracts with the museums and county communes and
Right.
the Sami Council. I've been working with different. So I had 14 field seasons since 1999 and working in all different parts of not every part of Norway, but from north to south and east to west.
And it is a big, long country, so that's a lot of traveling and, you know, getting used to all sorts of different kinds of local landscape, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, Norwegian topography is very different from southwest Norway where I'm now, where Stavanger is a great place to be because it's been so much excavation activity here over many years. Not the last few years, actually, but
Okay.
I've been digging everything from Mesolithic to Viking Age stuff here. So even though my main interest is Iron Age stuff, I will dig anything. And
Yeah.
survey work I've been doing, well, anything from, trench surveying to wilderness hiking, like I did this summer and autumn, where I was placed on a very northernmost peninsula of Norway, up in Finnmark, Nordkinnhalvøya, where I was spending a couple of months, hiking in the highlands and looking for blinds, rock-built blinds from reindeer hunting. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's really, you can't get any further north.
No.
You're finding archaeologists working in that way. You're finding things that you just don't expect of different ages and periods. What kind of span do you find Stone Age stuff as well as sort of Bronze and Iron, or is it mainly Iron Age stuff that ends up coming up, or sort of medieval?
I mean, there's a lot of everything, but Stone Age finds you have all over Norway, and Finnmark and the northernmost parts of Norway are really good for digging that or serving that because there's so little vegetation in the very northernmost parts. So you kind of get this primordial landscape in a way.
Yes, that must be so inspiring. But you're back now in Stavanger for the while, and so I want to ask you about, it probably seemed a long time ago since we last met or first met, but it also in many ways it was only sort of very recently that So I really would love to hear more about the thesis and what you feel you found. And that's a really tough thing because it's a monumental piece of work, and you've put in so many years of study. But what were the key sort of things with a bit of hindsight now, a few months later, what do you think are the things that you feel your thesis discovered or uncovered or revealed? I don't know what the best word is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a complex answer to that question. I mean, first off, I managed to map out this topic of, on the topic of animals and graves. It's been some things have been done, but it's a relatively new focus. My master thesis was relatively early out in new focus on animals and graves.
Yes.
So the first task, of course, was just mapping out this terrain and getting an overview of Rogaland and comparing it to elsewhere, finding that there are exactly 128 graves, relevant mortuary assemblages here, defined as graves, and that's often a question of definition and stuff. I've managed to put them into different, 31 of those graves are late Iron Age, most of them are early Iron Age. I've categorized them according to cremations, which are in the vast majority of the early Iron Age graves. And I've been looking at how these traditions, first and foremost, identifying traditions out from these tendencies I've got in the material. So tendencies I would define as by animal species, the anatomical elements are represented by, what kinds of graves are integrated in, or the different types of animals and finds are integrated in, like cremation graves with bear claws being, or remnants of bear claws and possibly bear pelts being a major find, actually, or by far most numerous finds from the early Iron Age.
So that's the pre-Roman Iron Age, isn't it? The bear claws, or is it into the Roman Iron Age?
They actually,
I get confused about when early means. It's forgive me.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. So the early Iron Age, defined by this Scandinavian chronology, it includes a pre-Roman Iron Age, but lasts until the mid-6th century.
Right. Yeah. So that's
AD.
the jump. That's when you mean late. Yeah. Sorry. Forgive me. I just forget when the early late divide fits.
Yeah. Fair enough. You have a different chronology in. Wait. What was
so bear claws are a big thing,
So 50 of 95 graves from early Iron Age, my early Iron Age material, contain bear claws. All except one of those assemblages contain burnt bear claws from cremation graves. And cremations are in majority at this time, but not that much in the majority. So there's a clear connection between these two traditions of cremating corpses and integrating bear claws in these funerals and redepositions of the material, which is so that's one of the most obvious traditions to focus on, and which I spent a lot of attention on, of course.
I mean, we're going this from a very empirical way, because you're tackling some really big concepts and ideas of how we understand this stuff. But about the bear claws, I mean, these are the most prominent, but they're not putting whole bears on, are they? Is it the pelts that have the claws still attached? Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's been the general perspective. The most frequently discussed thing, it's like these claws are remnants of bear skins deposited in the graves along with the dead, and there's been discussions of whether they were burnt with the dead, whether the dead was wrapped in them. The thing is, the data I've interpreted doesn't always indicate that to me. 13 of these graves contain only a single bear claw, and of course, and hardly any of them have been buried like in situ after the burning. So there is the redeposition. There are the other aspects of taphonomy that might have lost some bear claws, but to me it seems that there is a tradition for depositing single bear claws, as there is a tradition in the both earlier and late Iron Age for depositing single elements of animals, because you very rarely find entire animals. It's really only dogs and horses that are buried whole, and mostly during the late Iron Age. It's starting in the late Roman period, but mostly later. So bear claws, very special because it's only ever represented by the bear claws or the bear claw phalanges, the outermost bone here. There's only one. In the one unburnt grave with bear claws, there are 5 actual claws from the cross-hug grave. You can actually see them here.
Oh, yes, of course, on the thesis cover, yes.
Yeah, so those are unburnt bear claws, whereas this thing here is a burnt one, or a burnt claw phalange.
Right. So bears were a phenomenon, but they don't continue, do they? So the late Iron Age, that's no longer a practice.
And that's almost as fascinating as how popular they were, frequent they were in graves in the early Iron Age from the last century BC, because they suddenly stopped appearing in Norwegian graves in the mid-6th century.
Right.
And that's a mystery that hasn't been focused on by many others. At least I haven't found so.
That's intriguing, because it's almost taken.
For me, it became an approach to also try to understand why they were so popular in those 500-600 years before they went out of use. So I mean, a lot of things changed all over Scandinavia at the transition between the early and late Iron Age, which is also the transition between the migration period and the Merovingian period.
Right.
first off, in Stavanger, we kind of go from the golden age of finds, grave finds, houses. Is really a prosperous time till, and then Rogaland almost disappears on the map for 200 years, which is also a problem with my interpretations, because suddenly I don't have much material until the Viking period, and thus I've been comparing the Rogaland material to other regions to also fill in this gap to see how these traditions developed elsewhere, and whether they may have survived. Some of them have survived other places. But apart from the bear claws disappearing at the transition to late Iron Age, we also get a great reduction of general wild animals. Now, apart from bear claws, the material is dominated by domestic animals, but they become a lot more dominant in the last phase of the Iron Age, during Merovingian and particularly Viking period. And then you have some new indications of new rituals, like the positions of entire animals, or entire burials of entire horses and dogs. Some dogs have been cremated, and you have burials apparently of entire heads, like particularly cattle and horses. You also have a transition from what seems to be a tradition for depositing single unburnt molars of cattle and horses in graves. That seems to mostly disappear in the late Iron Age, and instead you have these new depositions. Yeah, well, you have the heads and the heads and the bodies, and you have a few things that might resemble food deposition of food gifts, but they are very rare, surprisingly so. Instead, I consider many of these single bones we find as remnants of mortuary meals, because every bone in a grave represents a dead animal, and you wouldn't go and pick up a random bone and put it into a grave. Graves are significant assemblages. You don't take random aspects to it. So what I figure is that these single bones we find at least represent sacrifice, probably, or probably ritual killing of an animal in conjunction with the funerals. Whereupon I assume, sheep, cattle, horses, pigs. I assume when we find a single bone of this in a grave, the rest of the animal has been eaten, probably in conjunction with the funeral.
So we're seeing traces that, of a communal set of acts in which the living are involved with. We're not just seeing we must kill a animal and dump it on the pyre, or there's a much more complex set of things going on. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm trying to understand though why they've chosen to integrate these bones in the graves. Because the reason I'm saying they're not food offerings is that we have a few cases of almost obvious food offerings. They are primarily restricted to pig bones, which are quite few in the material. It's 2 from the late Iron Age and 2 from the early Iron Age. And one of them is, for instance, a thigh bone, which might stem from ham. That kind of thing is from meaty parts of the body. Whereas the majority of single bones we find are either foot bones or, teeth are very common. You got like a few elements like single horn or stuff like that. And in some cases we have like ribs from lambs that might have been part of a meal. But in general, these foot bones and teeth and stuff, they're not from meals. They're cut off from butchery. But maybe they're more than that, because you wouldn't put waste material just like it's not a garbage can.
No.
So one of my big questions has been, why integrate these bones into the graves? And I end up coming up with some approaches to that.
So before, I'd love to hear about those, but before we get I just wanted to sort of get a sense of so people understand the burial data a little better, you've got basically, when you say they're cremation and they're burying, they're inhuming, what we call inhumation, unburnt burial. So there's, do you feel there's no consistent way of treating the human dead, and the animals are therefore being found in different associations, so there's no consistent single tradition, maybe, or are you, is that a fair thing to say? You're looking at a lot of complexity over that 1500 years or so.
There is a lot of complexity, variation, and change. But as I've been trying to establish or identify traditions during this, I've managed to categorize it a bit. And, well, there's definitely some consistency. For instance, the entire pre-Roman Iron Age and most cases from the early Roman period, the graves are burnt. It's cremation graves. The human remains are put in urns. There are relatively few animal bones in this phase. I mean, I only have 9 faunal finds from these 700 years.
Right.
And those also fall into some categories. Regarding the human remains, I would say that they've mostly wiped out every element of identity here. It's bones, put in urns, cleansed normally, and there are assemblages of human remains, but there's nothing to identify their personhood, I would say. Then you have which might be the reason why there are, or part of the reason why we have so few finds of animal here. The only traditions I've managed to establish clearly there, apart from pensions for like single elements, is the beginning of the bear claw tradition, which we here get the first instances of in the around AD 100. And this tradition for depositing cattle molars in unburnt cattle molars in burnt graves. And then we have some stray things that might be remnants for funeral meals, but again, the question is why deposit them in the graves.
Yeah.
Then in the late Roman period, you have this extreme proliferation of relevant finds for me, and that comes at a time when there are new impulses, among them from other Germanic tribes and from the Roman Empire. And there are new ways of treating the dead. Inhumation burials are slowly introduced during the late Roman period, or a few in the pre-Roman, end of pre-Roman age, but that's none in my material. And you start to get these stone-built long cists for containing inhumed bodies.
Okay.
Which dominate, which are very common here in this region during the late Roman migration period. And you have still this tradition for cremated bones in urns, which still dominate the material. But you get other ways of cremating or redepositing these cremants too. And it's just a huge proliferation of new ways of integrating animals. It's ranging from the bear claws to, actually all kinds of domesticated animals, except birds, and cats, which we don't have documented here in Rogaland at least.
No cats. Oh well, they're very difficult to find. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, cats appear in Sweden around this time first, but they're also more prominent in the late Roman age, late Iron Age.
Okay.
Yeah, but they also have a variety of wild animals integrated in the graves, ranging from birds and fish to hares and deer, which are very rare actually. Wild mammals rarely occur in Germanic and Norse graves, but they do, except for the bear. But a few do, and these are among the kind of interesting exceptions.
So, and do you have there's no or very little sea mammals, if I remember rightly, is there? There's nothing that you could call, seal or whale or
not in this region, no. But from most cities from where I focus on Northern Norway, whale was one whale bones you do up here, and then I'm talking about unworked whale bones, because that kind of bone material is also an important material resource. But I've kind of tried to. I have not built up my data set based on worked or reworked animal bones. Some of them may have been perforated. Well, not so much in the data set from Stavanger, from Rogaland.
Yeah.
But and yeah, some reworked animal bones and antler are parts of the assemblages that we're looking at, but that has not been a selection criteria.
Right. Yeah, because you've been looking at the animal remains, not the objects made from animal remains. That's a really important, because before, I want to ask about some of these ideas you've been trying to apply, because there's some big discussions in human studies, human animal relations, and non-human agents, and there's been a long sort of studies that have been applied to comparative religion and archaeology. I'd love to, it's very easy to jump down one explanation, isn't it? But you really do a good job at balancing up, different, or everything's to do with status is the other option. It's to do with social status of the dead, but I'm not saying those aren't important factors, but I'd just love to hear how you dealt with the different kind of ways we can interpret these choices to kill and butcher and share animal parts with the dead.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm trying to apply multiple perspectives and kind of consider them against each other and as different motivations. I treat this, going into the big why of the, I mean, my first task was, of course, trying to find out how they had integrated these animals in different graves, and that was a big job, and maybe the biggest job. But what really drove my research was to try and find out why they integrate these animals and why these traditions changed when they did. So looking at this chapter 9, where I kind of went into that question first, I divided it in 3 parts. We made this kind of tripartite structure, which was discussed later a lot. Looking first at animals' bones, kind of relating to this very much 1990s focus on symbolism. Well, it's not disappeared entirely, but I started looking in at these bones as symbols, anything as, pars pro toto symbolism, which is relevant to the fact that most animals are represented by single elements, part of the whole, to power symbolism, classic, traditional archaeological approaches, like look at the grave and you start talking about symbols of power and wealth and statues and whatnot, which is relevant and obviously is a case in many of the, especially most prominent graves. And I consider the possibility that some of these bones might have been integrated as symbols also of concepts, of myths, of symbols of death journeys even.
Yes, yeah.
Because, I mean, when you get horses integrated in graves together with boats often, especially in the late Iron Age, the combination of boats or ships even and horses is quite common. And that kind of appears to be a kind of double transportation symbolism. So that's one of the things I was looking in on. Of course, there's also the most prominent about early Iron Age graves, to my mind, at least the cremation graves, and particularly the bear claw graves, is transformation symbolism.
Yes.
Cremation is a fundamental transformation of the elements, but of the elements you burn, obviously.
Yeah.
You transform humans and animals also when you redeposit them and reintegrate them in urns. This is something you've been working a bit on, or quite a bit on.
Yeah, for the early Anglo-Saxon stuff though, but nothing to do with, but that's really interesting. Yeah.
And you have other elements that have also transform material that you find here. Besides ceramics, you have burnt clay, you have iron slag, antler. I found this. Well, I said to myself and everyone that I wasn't going to look on these reworked animal bones, but I ended up finding a very strong correlation between the bear claw graves, or the cremation graves with bear claws in them, and antler combs. And antler has been discussed by others and me also as transformative symbols. Antlers are regrown and lost every year, at least on, and it's interesting that I think 35 of my 49 cremated graves with bear claws had antler combs, and very few of the others had, actually.
Wow.
This was something Bo Petré actually noted 45 years ago in an article based on Swedish material. So that seems to be an interregional thing, and supporting this idea of the transformative things. But I didn't stop at the symbolism thing. So that was the first kind of introduction to
That's
this
sort of starting
chapter.
Point,
and I remember you and the others kind of wanting to know if I was by this order of this chapter. I was I do value all these different options equally, but my next focus was relationships between, or the relations between human and animals, and looking in and on whether companionship might be a motivation for including animals. Looking particularly at first and foremost on horses and dogs, because they are the only ones that are often, not always, but often buried whole together with the human beings, and these are animals that you don't primarily keep for meat. You keep them for as their co-workers. You cannot really use them efficiently without training and socializing them to an extent that they don't share with other animals. So that seemed a promising approach to understand why they were treated in these special ways. It's also interesting to see that they appear first in the late Roman period, at the time when you start to really get a lot of graves with personal items. So personal items can also be considered parts of personal relations or aspects of identity. And so can your close allies and friends and non-human co-workers, like dogs and horses. I did consider other animals too, of course, because in the longhouses of the Iron Age, people shared houses with sheep, for instance. They herding sheep and other animals makes for a quite close and strong connection between humans and animals. We should not disregard the cows or cattle in general. Milking cows, for instance, actually can be almost dangerous if you don't know the animal, if you don't not managing to relate well to it. And these, milk animals will have been, milk cows will have been along for many years. People will have had the chance to and had to get to know the individual animals. So we can talk about the potential for personal relationships between human and animal here.
Yeah.
And while I don't have any evidence of cattle being buried whole in my material, I do have evidence of cattle and horses or being decapitated and having their entire heads buried. And that is, considering human fixations on heads, faces, mental capacities, sight, that kind of thing. This to me appears to be not only a trophy thing, which wouldn't make so much sense in a grave, but an integration of the personhood of the animal, perhaps. Yeah.
And that's the second area, is it? And then there was a third area as well, or have I miscounted?
So that was my second focus on the companionships, where I kind of also discussed bears, which is counterintuitive. You don't, you didn't have human bear friendships, but I proposed this human bear mythical or bears as mythical companions.
Yes,
In
that
an
makes sense.
ontology where bears are closely associated not only with shape-shifting, but probably also with rebirth, regeneration, because they die and resurrect every spring. Die every autumn and resurrection every spring.
Yeah.
They also have many physical likenesses with humans. They walk on the back feet. They archaeological or like the main differences to the physiology of the human and the bear is kind of the pelt, the claws, and parts of the face like the snout and the teeth. But I mean, other than that, a bear paw skin looks very much like a human hand, freakishly. So
these they would have seen as sort of other kinds of human in a way, dangerous, but respected, feared, hunted.
There's an ambiguity there that I mean, obviously they hunted these bears that they got pelts and claws from, but there is some it appears to be a lot of respect involved in the relationship here, and I consider it. This is my approach to understand why these bear claws have been integrated in so many graves. But then I kind of go into the third kind of perspective, the agency of the bones and animals that have been integrated in the graves, where I kind of turn over this symbolism aspect of, so bear claws and cremations might symbolize transformations, maybe human-animal transformations after death, maybe regeneration things. But I started kind of leaving that paradigm to a certain extent, or at least adjusting it, because it, in the long run, didn't make so much sense to me. Who is this symbolism for? Some funerals would be prominent enough that many would see the integration of animals during the procedures. But integrating a small burnt bone in the grave, it's not a hugely the symbolism might be directed towards non-humans like ancestors or spirits or gods, but I find it more plausible that the bones, the funerals, sacrifices, these depositions were intended to do something. So it's not only about treating the animals as agents, which is also an aspect of human-animal studies, and kind of taking in the agency of animals. Even domesticated animals have, in captivity, have an agency. This agency will affect how human-animal relationships are formed and how significant and important they can become. But I also think they attributed these animal bones an agency. That they attributed the rituals and the positions and resulting graves an agency in itself. Where I look into concepts like transfer of life force or abilities or capabilities of the animal, like the bear's ability to, resurrect from the dead, and the bear's close relationship to man, possibly conceived as a genealogical relationship, as implied by myths, and also these terms used for the bear, because bear was kind of a taboo animal, and both in Norse and Sami culture, you avoided saying bear. You'd use by other terms like meaning like grandfather, uncle, that kind of thing.
Right, so euphemisms and allusions to the animal without mentioning it, because it was seen as bad luck to bring the bear if you said its name. What was the idea? Do we know?
It would. So it seems. So at least maybe just was considered disrespectful or something. This is not only in the Norse and Sami culture. It appears to be an aspect of the huge and broad Finno-Ugrian and Indo-European languages, where where it seems that these names have changed also as a new name has become institutionalized. Bear, for instance, appears to actually mean brown, so probably it was another metaphor for whatever they called it until that often became the steady term.
So if we've got these different ideas we approach the data with, have you got any graves you can show us so we can see a little bit more about the kind of evidence? Because I think people have perhaps a view of Viking period burials as based on the artist reconstructions, and that they're all just, you know, they understand they're artist reconstructions, but sometimes when you look at the actual evidence, it helps people to understand the challenge of interpreting.
This is mostly the images I used for the cover of my thesis, which shows some of the variation in the material, ranging from the imprint of a bird feather in a Viking Age ship grave to these bear claws that were, or bear claw phalanges, which were integrated in a Westland cauldron, this probably Roman-produced bronze cauldron from the late Roman period. It was covered by a layer of unworked wool, actually. Oh. And also contained, in addition to the bear claws, it contained some bones of a sheep or goat and the human bones from a middle-aged man. We have cattle teeth. We have horse teeth. These are a collection mostly of bird bones. I'm not sure if you can see my pointer when I do this. We have cattle horns, and we got seashells or snare shell in this case, and even this strange bone here, which is from a species of shark. It's a dogfish stinger, or it's a it's kind of a spine that is venomous and is used as a defensive mechanism.
Fantastic. Unusual find.
Yeah, these are cattle and human bones. I can't even remember which were which. But let's see, I will try and leap forward to some actual reconstructions of the... That's muting, okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to...
Just click through, yeah.
Right, let's see. More bear claws. Oh, here's a reconstruction of two graves. With my... one of them being... Do you see the entire image here?
Yes.
Yes. So this is the reconstruction of the only unburnt grave with bear claws in my data set. It's from Krosshaug. That's one of the most spectacular graves we have, actually. It's from around AD 400. It's constructed like, originally it was a huge mound, possibly more than 8 meters high, and we don't know what diameter it was because it was quite damaged before. They had spent 7 years or so driving away topsoil from this grave mound before they actually got to the core cairn, which was then dismantled for fence building and stuff like that. Before, not archaeologists, but customs inspector came and collected the actual grave finds from it, which were stored within this oak coffin or frame. There may not have been a bottom to it. And it contained the richest assemblage of grave goods from the era, in the grave here at least. Lots of imported goods, including fancy Roman glasses, metalware, tableware, and, a little piece of what's probably remnants of a bear's pelt and 5 bear claws. It appears to be a woman's grave, considering the artifacts.
But the skeletal remains are not very well preserved, I suppose. So okay.
There was actually no skeletal material
none,
in
right.
or no bones left in the grave. These claws being comparable to nails, and they were, which are keratinous and were probably preserved due to close contact with the birch bark, the thin outer skin of the birch bark, which has been used here at. And which seems to have a preservative effect in addition to the entire grave structure. But no actual bones were preserved.
Intriguing.
Now, of course, bone preservation is very poor in general in Western Norway.
Right.
And that also goes for this Viking Age grave I've got on the side here, which is 400 years later than this one.
It's just the famous Galsel Queen, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It's normally portrayed with a horse head at her feet, not this cattle skull, which is my reinterpretation of it, or actually Sean Denham's results from his bone analysis was that the only bone material left from this grave, a tooth thought to stem from a horse, is more likely cattle.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and as such, it falls into a tradition seen elsewhere too, like in the Oseberg grave, the ship grave from southeastern Norway, where you have a cattle head on the bed of the buried woman in that grave too. It's almost from the same time actually as this one. So that's a bit of a crude reinterpretation with this glued on a photo from a North Norwegian grave, which also contained a cattle skull from the same era. So yeah, and apart from that, you can see some of the riches she was buried with. It's one of the richest graves from that era in Norway.
And it's been reproduced in art many times. I keep seeing different versions of it, but it's always been with the horse, and now we've got this evidence it's a completely different beast. I mean, still a tradition of animal sacrifice, and the head is there in the grave. Would have been a very prominent symbol, but that's really changes things, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And yeah, I do consider it kind of the same tradition as whether you put a horse or a cattle head in. Yeah, these are different animals, or different relationships and myths related to them. Even different long-term traditions. I mean, both cattle and horses go back to Indo-European traditions and rituals and myths. But cattle is the only one that's represented in the graves prior to the late Roman period in Norway. I think actually in entire Norway. Whereas horses come in associated with these inhumation graves. You have cattle in both inhumations and cremations, but horses, I have no burnt horse bones at all in my entire material, and that includes a few horse molars deposited in cremation graves. So kind of different. Well, obviously different animals with different associations, but they're both very prominent ones. And I think this apparently new tradition for depositing heads, that's kind of the same tradition whether you include the horse or cow or ox by a head instead of other body parts. But I mean, there are still different associations with these animals. And the horse burials are in Viking period more strongly connected to weapon graves, but not only. There are other associations too.
So I have two more questions for you, amongst many I could ask. Many people looking at these artist reconstructions, and showing how the animal remains are an important part of the funerary process, will be looking to what survives of Norse mythology or Nordic mythology to match them up. How to what extent do you feel we can connect those stories, those later iterations of pre-Christian religions of the North, to the data that you're using, to the evidence you found? I mean, we know that, as you said, traditions change, but there are still traditions. So I wonder, what do you feel about that?
Well, obviously, I've been trying to connect these animals to myths and myths that we know. But it's problematic, of course, because those myths we know about from the Iron Age are primarily from the Viking period. They're written down centuries later during the medieval period. And there's, well, I don't have so much problem trying to integrate these finds with late Iron Age myths, because it's the transition from the Merovingian period to the Viking period, there are changes happening, but it's still very much the same expressions, both in the graves and in the animal art, for instance, this transformative art that is one of the defining traits of the era. But pulling these myths back to the early Iron Age, and especially far back in the early Iron Age, is problematic, because we don't really know how valid they were. We're going, if we're drawing them back to the before the Roman period, I don't think we should really. We have evidence that a character like the god Odin was a factor in during the migration period, so we can at least pull some of the aspects of the mythology back before. But I mean, the further back you go, it's the harder it gets to connect these grave finds to mythology. And again, it's, well, we have aspects of mortuary rites and symbolism that clearly relate to the mythology, like the Gotlandic picture stones, which have been seen to portray known and probably unknown myths known from the Viking Age.
Yes, but not everything can be linked to one that we have, but yeah.
Yeah, and these stones have probably also been grave markers. So yeah, we have aspects like that. We have other aspects of iconographic symbolism that is relatable to mythology, but it's not that easy to do the same thing with this faunal finds. And my main approach, well, when it comes to my approach, it's primarily death journeys that I'm relating to the written myths. Death journeys that are particularly associated with dogs and horses because of the way they're presented in the graves, but also where of course but also because of their association with both graves, with both symbolism, and the fact that the horse is an obvious transportation animal. I mean, in the pre-modern age, unless you're using a boat, you're walking, or you're riding a horse, or you're or you're on a cart drawn by an ox. That's basically the alternatives. So the movement symbolism and the agency of horses is hugely important. Why dogs should be integrated in graves like this? Well, they might not carry the dead to the realm of the dead, but they might lead the way there. They might also just be integrated as companions, like horses, like cattle, because afterlife, like life, would be inconceivable without animals. So these can be associated with personhood, with biographies and shared biographies. And again, with this transition that seems to start from the late Roman period, about where it tend to start integrating personal aspects in the graves. You no longer wipe out the identity; it becomes stronger and stronger. And in the late Iron Age, especially the Viking Age, almost all the graves are filled with like personal and useful tools, everything from weapons and jewelry to other tools to status objects, personal objects, mementos, and animals. So I think, and of course the cattle can also be associated with this, but I don't think I'm not even sure they operated with a concept of death journeys because before the maybe not before the late Iron Age, and probably I would say probably not before the late Roman period. So there are elements from the late Roman period, for instance, combination of horses and dogs and this weaponry coming up. So I don't think it makes much sense to talk about death journeys to distant and afterlives unless you also preserve personhood in death.
Yeah.
So before that, when you kind of either wipe out the identity or the cremations seem to be more about transforming humans, animal bones, items into something else. It might be about regeneration, rebirth, perhaps in another form. But I'm not even sure these graves, or all of them, were centered on the dead person.
Yes, that's true. That's a really important point.
I suspect that in some cases, that dead person or their remains were considered a resource of regeneration for the multi-species society of the Iron Age,
right?
Where these graves might have been considered nodes in the landscape, where humans, animals, domesticated and wild meat, in a way, where sacrifice, we can problematize the distinction between sacrifice and funeral sometimes. Both based on the concept and the evidence of it.
Wow, so that's a really fascinating thought. Because it goes back to your point you said about are they even graves? How we create these modern categorizations of cemetery, burials, graves, and the funerals, sacrifice. These may not apply in the same way. Yeah, that's really interesting.
That is my impression anyway. I mean, sure, an urn grave, it's still a concentrated assemblage of human and in some cases animal bones and the urn and stuff like that. Yeah, sure, and deposited in, placed in a small chamber or a small stone cyst. Sure, it's definable as a grave, but it might not have been primarily about that person. It might have been about kind of sending the life force of the person and of the human and animals back to the multi-species society. It might even be about reusing the bones for ritual purposes. Because my impression is that they've made some efforts to not only transform the bones but also to preserve them, because burning the bones is a great way of preserving them. Calcinated bone preserves a lot better than unburned bones. In addition, you put them in these ceramic urns, and which to increasing degree are placed in within these stone cysts, in small stone cysts in a mound or a cairn perhaps, which preserves what's inside very well. I even play with the idea that they might have extracted material from these some of these urns, which because many of them have quite little human or animal bones. And I mean, if you take into account the possibility that bones and bodies in general were infused with life force of that being, that you want to reuse, you can apply it both during the sacrifice. You spill blood, and focus on spilling blood. It's quite apparent from sources ranging like Ibn Fadlan's description of funeral, Viking Age funeral at Volga.
Very messy things, yeah.
There are other sources also indicating that laut, this blood, was a strong element of life force, which we don't see archaeologically, but which would have been an aspect of the actual sacrifice of the animals we find. Whereas the archaeological traces are mostly the bones and teeth and sometimes horns and antlers. But I see no reason why they should not also be preserving these aspects of life force. And that could be a reason why they've gone to such lengths to preserve them, at least in the early Iron Age. That changes at transition to late Iron Age, when you not only have a great reduction of or a great increase of inhumation graves at the expense of cremation traditions, but also the cremations change. You no longer have these redepositations into urns. They also completely disappear. Ceramics generally disappear, just like the bear claws do. And that says to me that you have a completely new attitude to death. Well, obviously, it's a completely new way of using materials and using other materials instead.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the graves and funerals, they're doing it in completely different ways. Cremations will often be well, they've either redeposited the cremains unsorted and buried them, or just bury them in situ often, which is a whole other way of dealing with the dead. And and then you get the influx of personal elements, other animals, things that might be associated with, personhood and preserving personhood in the afterlife, and possibly even preparing for death journeys. Whereas this other earlier tradition, I think it's as much about regeneration, transformation, and kind of reapplying that life force, the essence, the agency inherent in bones and bodies.
That's a really interesting distinction. And that leads me to my final question, which is, do you feel that insight or any other aspect to your thesis has wider implications in the way we approach animals in funerary contexts, whether it's in the Scandinavian Iron Age or anywhere else?
I think it might have. I mean, this is a kind of new perspective I'm promoting, and I think it's got great potential, actually. Even in our society, we don't, in our secular society, we don't treat the bones of our dead as random waste. It's associated with personal emotion, lives. It's taboo and holy in a way.
Yes.
I think that might have been the case then too, but taboo and holy didn't necessarily mean that they didn't reapply it. And I think it has potential for understanding or at least a new perspective on how and why people were dealing with the dead and with the animals and combining these. And not only in Scandinavia. I connect this ontologically to the concept of animism.
Yes.
Or the new animism as promoted by Graham Harvey and others. And I think that is, it's not the only way of going about it, but I think it's a promising one. Yeah. Because animism as such might be defined as ways or an ontology where you relate to other than human beings as relationships that you have to deal with. That may be some, not all, but certain animals, even plants, trees, places, and what might be called spirits, but which, spirit is kind of a dodgy term. So maybe we could instead say the essence of the agency of the dead when we're talking about remnants from the dead.
That's fascinating. Well, I just have to conclude by thanking you so much, Arild, for sharing your work, and to congratulate you again, Dr. Klokkervoll, on completing this major piece of work after so many years, and 2 volumes I have here, and it's available online. And we'll put links in the description so people can learn more about your work from the online published materials. But I wondered if there's any final thoughts or reflections you have for us, or anything before we conclude.
Well, that's a bit hard, but I can.
That's a difficult one to ask.
Yeah, it is.
After you've talked so long and in such depth.
Yeah, I might conclude with maybe a quote from the last page of the first volume of my thesis.
Yes.
Well, I'll simply conclude with a sentence that animals were integral to Iron Age traditions, transitions, and transformations, contributing their essential traits, skills, agency, and bodily remains. Apart from that, I would say that I have focused a lot on how these traditions changed over time, and I've been particularly looking at the transition around AD 200 and the mid-6th century. Dividing my material and my grave finds into 3 distinct eras, which I think have explanatory potential, both for what we find and for how the culture and religion and ontology developed. So yeah, that might be some concluding words.
Thank you so much. It's been a real interesting and insightful, and just all the very best with all your ongoing endeavors in the world of archaeology and beyond.
Thank you very much, Howard. Thanks for taking me into the program.
I think that worked very well. I shall just edit that one bit out. I'll press stop record now. I'll chop the beginning and end, and then I'll edit that.
Follow ArchaeoDeath on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.